Hello and welcome to Unacademy, the one-stop solution for an English medium UPSC Civil Services aspirant. Today, as part of your Hindu analysis, we'll be discussing 7 important articles out of the Hindu newspaper. But before we begin, a very important announcement, a critical announcement for you. The ultimate price is back. The 15th month's course is at 24999. This is based on popular demand. A lot of you have quoted us that we want the price back. So here we are with that demand, which is 24999 for 15 months preparation, 56 rupees per day with regards to your preparation. And this offer will only be there till 9th June. A very important aspect here, we have our batch starting on 8th June, the Triumph batch. But remember, on 9th June, this offer will end. So if you have ever thought about becoming a part of the Unacademy family, this is the right time to become the part of this family. Thereafter, let's look at the topics we have to cover. First, a very interesting one. Finally, the location for COP29 has been decided, but we'll revise a lot of different aspects here with regards to COP and UNFCCC, what it is, what is the idea here. Then we'll talk about health regulations. There have been multiple tragedies which have happened recently. We'll talk about that. Further, cancer and the issue with data. Thereafter, H5N1, H5N1, N2 both have been in the news. Avian influenza, or what we call as bird flu. First human victim has been claimed. Thereafter, Boeing CST-100 Starliner. This is again a very interesting topic which has been in the news previously, but finally the launch was there yesterday. Then we'll talk about the EFTA, which has happened recently with the European countries itself, and we'll end with the final turnout data for this Lok Sabha election, which is going to be interesting that way. So with this, let's start our analysis for today. And as always, we'll try to give you as much backstory as possible. The static portion will be covered so that you understand the topic in the current affairs and the current context also. So the first topic is a very simple one vis-a-vis an article which is the climate conference in November to emphasize on peace and truce. Now there are two aspects to why peace and truce, and the first aspect is in the current geopolitical context happening in Azerbaijan now. Please note this for the prelims examination, generally very important. The location for the November COP29 is going to be Baku in Azerbaijan. Now Azerbaijan itself has been in a lot of issues with regards to Armenia, and we have the Russia-Ukraine conflict itself, and in that context climate action becomes problematic. Now when we look at the article, generally it talks about truce and peace, that climate action can only happen vis-a-vis when there is peace and when there is no cannon shot. However, for us as a UPSC aspirant, what becomes important is what were the outcomes of COP28 and what has been the history of the UNFCCC and what is this COP word which I am using. Now, first and foremost, this COP means Conference of Parties or Conference of the representatives who meet vis-a-vis their countries itself. So, Conference of Parties. This is a conference which happens within the framework convention of what is called as United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which we call as UNFCCC. UNFCCC in 1992 at Rio de Janeiro started this idea, the concept itself of climate action, that we need to stop emitting the greenhouse gases which we are emitting, and more than that, the idea that the earth is warming. So global warming, climate change and stopping greenhouse gas emissions is something which was conceptualized in UNFCCC 1992 Rio de Janeiro Convention, was also called the Rio Convention or Rio Summit in that regard. Now, since then there have been multiple COPs, but some of them stand out. And what I've done here is I've compiled all of them till 2018 for you in one space. Then we'll talk about the Dubai conference which happened last year, which is COP28, and then we'll talk about what is the road ahead. This is the structure of how we are going to cover it. Now, the most important convention or the COP which is quoted within UNFCCC is called Kyoto Protocol, and that is in 1997 COP3, which is Kyoto, Japan. Now, why is Kyoto Protocol considered very important? Because it is here for the first time, in a way not properly legally binding, but in a way a legally binding convention was created, under which the idea was that developed countries are the reason after the Industrial Revolution they have added too much in billions of tons of carbon into the atmosphere itself, and which it in turn has led to global warming, and the earth is warming. This was the idea, that the earth is warming, and the levels at which it is dangerous. It can go into a certain cyclical understanding where the earth can tip over a certain point and then warm to a point when it will become uninhabitable to live on earth itself. It will be a problematic future. So COP3, which is Kyoto Protocol itself, it created a very important concept, and this is a very important point you need to understand, which is the concept of common but differentiated responsibilities. Common meaning that it is everybody's responsibility to act on the climate change itself, but differentiated. This is a very important point, which is differentiated, which is not every country has the same obligation. The first world, the European sector, the Americans, since 1820s, since 1850s, have been adding year on year billions of tons of carbon without any regulations, and have developed to become what we today call as developed countries or the first world itself. And the idea is that you can't ask India, for us, for example, us or China or the other developing countries to stall their development for climate change. This is a very important point, that you can't ask a developing country to stall their development because you polluted the globe itself. So when it comes to the climate change agreements itself, this is a very important principle which is followed. Common but differentiated responsibilities. India has a different responsibility, China has a different responsibility, other developing countries in Africa have a different responsibility, but Europe has a different responsibility. They are the ones why we are in this situation. They have single-handedly added to the greenhouse gases and in turn led to climate change and global warming. So the idea was in 1997 this principle was put into place, and in 2005 it was going to come into force. In between that, we had the Marrakesh and the New Delhi conference or COP. In Marrakesh, the idea was we have to decide what are the parameters of the Kyoto Protocol which will go into the enforcement itself, and further in Delhi there comes a very important declaration in 2002, which is COP8, which is called Delhi Declaration. In this it was said that the development of the poorest countries, the LDCs, least developed countries, is very, very important because they are the ones who are paying the price. Renewable energy is not cheap, fossil fuel development is more affordable and cheaper for these countries itself. They can't emit, so how do they develop? That is the question. So India itself also talked about transfer of technology, that you have the best technology, you transfer it to the least developed countries, to the developing countries, so that we have a better path towards development, a greener path in that regard. Then you have the idea that the financing of this development, the finance, this is a very important point. Who will give the money for a greener future, for a greener path to development? If I have, for example, an engine which works on petrol, it may be for $1,000. The idea is the same hydrogen engine, which is much more greener, may be for $10,000. Now, why would I choose a $10,000 engine over a $1,000 engine? And the idea is somebody has to mitigate the price. Somebody has to give me money to incentivize taking greener care or greener technology. And therefore, the idea of financing, what is called fast start finance, which is quick financing of greener projects. Then the most important development after that is considered to be the Bali roadmap and the Bali action plan, that how are we going to basically put Kyoto Protocol into place. But there's a pattern here, and you should understand this point. The pattern is day in, day out, and through each of these, there's a lot of big things which are set, but they are not followed up. So though the Bali action plan will say that we will go for an adaptation fund, we will go for climate financing, we will help the LDCs go forward, nothing really happens. And therein lies the biggest scam of the COP, which came in 2010, which is called the Green Climate Fund. The Green Climate Fund is actually properly a scam, because under this it was said that for the next 10 years, between 2010 to 2020, now extended till 2025, the developed countries will pay the world, developing countries, $100 billion a year to finance greener future, greener projects. When I say green, means these are less emitting in the larger context. Now, why do I call it a scam? Because Green Climate Fund firstly never became operational in the next 2 to 3 years, and when it came to giving this $100 billion, this has never been met even in 1 year. It was year on year $100 billion not given. Over and above that added some amount of money into this fund, which is insufficient and inadequate for the whole developing sector itself, and the differentiated responsibility says that we don't need to contribute here. So, when it came to the developed countries to contribute, they have not been contributing to the Green Climate Fund itself. Further, they now started to talk about something called in Warsaw REDD, REDD and REDD+. This has been in the news and has been asked by UPSC also, which is reduction in emission from deforestation and forest degradation. Basically, whatever carbon sinks we are cutting, that is adding to the emissions itself. Therefore, we will reduce the carbon emissions via stopping forest degradation and deforestation. REDD+, REDD+, and REDD. Now, this again has become a totally dead letter with no real development here. Again, you needed to incentivize the countries to not cut their forest and stop their urbanization. That has again not happened. Further, the latest and the most important convention which is quoted everywhere was the Paris Climate Agreement, or what we call as COP21. Here again, the idea that $100 billion will be put into the fund itself, and we need the Paris Agreement where a new terminology emerged. In the Paris Agreement, the new terminology was the concept of NDCs, nationally determined contributions. This is a new vocabulary which emerged. I have already told you what do you mean by Kyoto Protocol. I already told you what do you mean by Adaptation Fund, Delhi Declaration, REDD+, and Green Climate Fund. This was added in the Paris Climate Agreement, wherein the idea was, let us not dictate as a COP, as a Conference of Parties, let us not dictate to the nations what they need to do. Rather, let them decide what do they want to contribute. So, for example, every country was going to say, we are going to do this by 2025, this by 2050, this by 2047, nationally determined contributions. The problem is that there is no regulatory mechanism or binding aspect here. If the country misses any of these targets, there is no consequence for that, though the COP, which is the concept of Kyoto Protocol itself, is legally binding vis-a-vis certain mechanisms. However, this is not legally binding. So, this is again an idea that America said we will do this, then Trump came and changed it, then certain European countries said, EU said we will do this, again that has not been done. The idea which I am trying to push here is a very simple point. This is not a new thing. This has been happening since 1992, 32 years of COP after COP after COP, and big things have been talked about. When it comes to operationalizing, it has not happened. This is not a criticism. This is India's criticism to the idea of a multilateral institution which is trying to act for climate change. And it is not that the European countries really can't work together. I'll give you a very good example. When it came to UNFCCC, the contribution of the developed countries, which are mostly in the temperate zone, away from the tropics itself, they have not really contributed anything. Why? Because climate change impacts first the island nations of the Polynesian sector, the Australian sector. The least developed countries get impacted first. So, here the impact to them is delayed, therefore, their action is very slow. You take into context Montreal Protocol, which is basically on ozone layer depletion. Because ozone layer depletion started from the higher latitudes and was going to impact each and every developed country, specifically Europe, quite a lot. Montreal Protocol till today is considered to be the most successful protocol in which we have reversed ozone layer depletion, and there have been certain spaces where the HFCs, the CFCs, after phasing them out, there has been repair of the ozone layer itself. So, when it came to them, they were ready to act. But when it comes to us, for example, a country like India, which has a very, very long coastline, and with rising sea levels, we are the most vulnerable. The countries, for example, Vanuatu and all Vanuatu have also already started to go underwater. There have been multiple island nations which are losing inches of land day by day, but there is no action. So the point which I am trying to argue here is a very simple one, which is that this is all based on developed countries' intention and willpower, which is extremely low. Now, what happened last year? Last year again, there was a whole big document which was produced, which had a lot of different ideas and concepts talked about. The first one was the concept of global stocktake. Now, this idea was that we will now regularly check how we are developing or performing in the idea with regards to the COP and our actions and the NDCs, which is nationally determined contributions, how we're doing. So in 2018, the idea was talked about that 1.5 degrees Celsius, if we go over it, it will become a tipping point. Then in 2020, everybody was asked to share the concept of the nationally determined contributions. And then the idea was first global stock take will happen in 2025. That where have we reached? Have we actually stopped the warming of the earth itself? Then we will again ask each and every country to revise their NDC. Then the next global stock take is going to happen in 2030. Then everybody is going to revise their NDC. And then the last major idea was by 2050 we will become carbon neutral and carbon resilient. So the idea was we are creating a path, which is decide the nationally determined contribution. Let's see if it worked or not. Then again redefine it. Then let's see if it worked or not. Then again redefine it and then get the future which we are looking for. Now, this was the concept of global stocktake. Now, again 2025 is 1 year away and most of the NDCs have not been achieved. Further, the same thing is going to happen in 2025. Everybody is going to revise it and by 2030 we will miss it. Because there is no action and because the impact is on least developed countries more, the problem is nobody really cares. Further, the idea was the concept of global goal on adaptation. The idea was let us finance adaptation capabilities and technology. Again, something which has really not been done till this point, which is there has been no adaptation fund properly operationalized or created and no technologies have been supported vis-a-vis the COP. So, though they talked about it in Dubai in COP 28, the idea was it has not been operationalized. Then there was a very interesting section which was said. What was said was that the UN CSAT had decided and estimated that the wealthy nations, which are developed nations, owe developing countries close to $500 billion by 2025 under the new concept of new collective qualified goal for climate finance. Now, climate finance has generally been very, very weak, very, very ill-defined vis-a-vis how the money is going to be given. Now, over and above that, whilst they had said that between 2010 and 2020, we will give you $100 billion a year. Now, they have come to the conclusion, no, we only owe you $500 billion. Again, something which is just a dead letter and nobody has again further contributed to Green Climate Fund. Green Climate Fund, there is a little bit of contribution from time to time that is basically insufficient. Therefore, the idea itself was you need to give us a certain path so that our carbon footprint goes down. Loss and damage fund. The idea was, we've discussed this previously also, loss and damage fund was least developed countries do not have the capability to respond to disasters, to respond to extreme weather events, and therefore we need to help them in developing back or bringing their economy back from loss and damage. So, everybody is going to contribute and thereafter once they've contributed will help them come back to a greener path, sustainable development. Again, this fund has not been operationalized and a lot of new research has pointed out wherein the developed countries are saying, how can you attribute a certain local event to climate change? You tell us. If you can create a linkage, then we'll be happy to give you money. This again is becoming the second scam within climate finance itself, where least developed countries are asking for money, but they are not getting it. Then there was the Global Renewables and Energy Efficiency Pledge. This was that we will make, and this was a pledge taken by a lot of European countries, we will triple the renewable energy on earth, and the idea was at least 11,000 gigawatt by 2030. If not 2030, by 2050 for sure, 11,000 gigawatt should be the least of the target to triple. So whatever renewable capacity is there across the world, we will triple it. And last but not the least was the declaration that we will triple nuclear energy also, which is nuclear, though it has its fallouts with regards to nuclear waste, they said it is still a better option. So let's go for nuclear. Now all of this is still pending, and now the next has already been announced. The idea is they will follow up on all of these aspects, but the problem is they have to follow up with all these aspects also. Now UPSC has tended to ask a question vis-a-vis, and this is a tendency which UPSC has developed, and that is why we are having this discussion, where they are trying to ask that is the COP enough? Is UNFCCC enough? And have developed countries actually been true to this concept itself? And therefore, what you have to understand is that it's a cascading effect. The list of things to be done is increasing, whilst what has been done is decreasing or stagnant. And therefore, this from Kyoto Protocol to Delhi Declaration to technology transfer to the idea of Green Climate Fund to the idea of Kyoto Protocol by the idea that we will Doha Declaration that we will reduce it further to the idea RED plus, even the contributions to this $500 billion to the concept of Global Adaptation Fund, to the concept of loss and damage fund, further the tripling of nuclear energy, all of this is in the future. And the next global stock take is coming next year. This is the story of COP till this point. So rather than just talking about Azerbaijan, I try to give you a larger understanding of this whole process of COPs and what is the basic development here. The article itself argues, the Hindu itself is arguing that there is a lot to be done, but they were not telling what. So I have basically given you a list of things which still have to be covered. Now, whatever question can come in the examination. Now, this is a very realistic question in GS paper 3. In the current geopolitical landscape, consensus on climate action will be difficult. Explain. This is a very good question because it brings in IR plus environment plus world history in a way, because it is asking that the current geopolitical landscape, which is basically world history and IR together, how does it impact our resolve for environment? In these type of questions, you have to, in the introduction, make sure, add to the idea that the current geopolitical landscape, you can talk about Russia, Ukraine, you can talk about Azerbaijan, Armenia, you can talk about Yemen, you can talk about Oman, you can talk about what is happening in most of the African countries. The idea is everybody is already fighting, and then in the body, tell the examiner that climate action needs a lot of consensus. It needs agreement. However, we are not doing that because we are already divided on certain issues. So how will we agree? Climate action, a greener future, cannot be only one country's job. India is one of the best performing when it comes to the nationally determined contributions, but only India can't change the globe. The global climate change action has to have consensus. Russia is not a part of most of these conversations nowadays. Yesterday itself, we had Zelensky going to the what we call as 80 years of Normandy, but Russia was not there. Zelensky was part. Ukraine used to be a part of USSR at that point of time. So the idea is you can't just change the future by one country. So please do use this type of question to practice these type of ideas. Sometimes intersection matters. This can come both in GS paper 2 and 3 in that sense. With this, let's move to the next question, which is health regulations and the idea that there needs to be a better approach, a base to top approach. Now, this article has a very interesting premise. Further, a lot of solutions have been given. That way, it becomes invaluable for our preparation. Now, let's try to create the healthcare landscape of India. We have the public, which is government hospitals, or more than 50% contribution by the government. This is one of the core sectors in that regard. And then you have the private sector. Now, the first thing which the article points out is we tend to talk about the private sector as a monolith, as a homogeneous whole itself. But the article says that we need to open up the private sector because there are multiple actors here. The first one are the large corporate hospitals, the Apollos and the Medantas and the Fortises of India. Then you have smaller but medium sized hospitals. These are bigger than nursing homes, which basically are the third category, which are nursing homes. And last but not the least is the single doctor clinic. Now, this article has been written in the context of a certain fire which happened in Delhi, where 8 newborn children lost their life in a nursing home accident which recently happened. And the question is, there was a lot of hue and cry about health regulations. Now, according to the article, all of these are under the scrutiny of the government, and close to 50 regulations need to be adhered upon to open any single establishment which is going for healthcare. So, this number is quite big. 50 regulatory approvals and mechanisms are there to open a nursing home or a single doctor clinic. Even smaller hospitals itself, large corporate hospitals as it is, are scrutinized the most. When we talk about the load, people tend to think about that the public hospitals take most of the brunt when it comes to OPD patients or hospitalizations. But the article says that 70%, this would not be visible to you, 70% of all OPD patient and 50% of all hospital or hospitalization is on the private sector. So, basically what India becomes is a mixed healthcare sector. It is called a mixed care or healthcare sector. Now, under mixed care or mixed healthcare sector, the load on the private sector is even more than on the public sector. This is the data provided by the article itself. Now, as soon as there was the nursing home fire, there was a call for more regulations, more concepts of regulatory mechanisms and more governmental control. Now, what the article says is that the problem as of right now is that India is trying to go for medical tourism, which is making a destination for people coming from abroad for medical care and any form of procedure or surgery, and world class tag is now being pursued by most of these institutions. And in that context, we have created a regime for regulations which are unrealistic. The word which is used by the article is unrealistic. Unrealistic standards have been created, and over and above that, the regulatory mechanism is such that it is taking multiple months to get even one form of approval. There are delays, there is a lot of red tapeism, and we have created an unrealistic space in which most of these institutions then have to evade regulations. The example which is given is for example, the Clinical Establishments Act of 2010. Clinical Establishments Act of 2010 was regulated in 2010, but since then, last 14 years, the states have not adopted even one of the sections given by the center vis-a-vis this act itself. Why? Because the states were able to realize it is unrealistic to put it on the whole private sector. And the reason why it is unrealistic is because we are having a top-down approach. This is where the article says base to top approach. We have a top-down approach as of right now, where we look at the large corporate hospitals and then create regulatory mechanisms. The article is saying that we need to change our approach. We need to go from single doctor clinic approach towards large corporations. Basically, whatever regulations we are creating are so unrealistic, are so impossible to put into place that single doctor clinics and nursing homes actually evade it. That is why the reason there was a proper fire in the nursing home, because the fire tenders and the fire regulations were such that the nursing home would never have met it. That can be met by a large corporate hospital, but it cannot be met by a nursing home. Now the question which you will ask me is then, why are nursing homes important? And therein comes the concept of affordability. What the article argues is, because affordable healthcare is not accessible at these 2 points, they have to go to nursing homes. And I think we all know that whenever there is any health distress, the first thing which we do is not to go to the Apollos and the Fortises. We go to a single doctor clinic. We go to the doctor who is most accessible to us, because he will not take a fees of 5,000 rupees to just check for a common cold. We will go to a single doctor clinic. He will write the basic medications and give it to us. If it is serious, then we go to nursing homes or above. The idea is, this is where the affordability factor comes in. So there are two things which are being pointed out at the same point of time. Firstly, the health landscape of India is a mixed landscape which is not monolithic. Further, large corporate hospitals and the private sector itself is not monolithic, it is heterogeneous. It has a lot of different categories from the smallest to the largest, and regulations are top down, which is they are looking at the large corporate hospitals. They can mostly meet all of these regulatory mechanisms because they have the money, they have the capital, they have the capacity. On the other hand, smaller nursing homes and single doctor clinics, they can't have that much level of capital and money to regulate with regards to large corporate hospitals. Therefore, there is a need for a complete overhaul. Now, some articles would stop here, but fortunately for us, the article actually gives you the solutions. What are the ways in which we can make sure that the healthcare sector becomes better? One thing is straightforward, you can't be looking top down, you have to look from down up, which is you need to first look at how we will regulate them, what is realistic for them, and therefore we will then change our outlook, to create an understanding that our outlook should be like this and not like that. Therefore, regulatory mechanism should be first there for clinical doctors. Now, what are the solutions? How do we make healthcare more better and regulatory friendly? Now, this is a very important aspect, because an example has been given in the article that a similar fire had happened in a government hospital, a similar fire happened in a private hospital. When it happened in a nursing home, the license of the nursing home was taken away. However, in the government hospital, there was an inquiry committee which was established. So, it cannot be that you have a differential approach and differential impact. It has to be similar. Therefore, the first thing is we have to make sure that quality matters. Quality healthcare, this should be our priority at all levels. It is not infrastructure, it is the quality of the doctor, it is the quality of care given. Second, which is more important, common or joint responsibility when it comes to actions and consequences. When it comes to actions and consequences, it has to be joint responsibility and all stakeholders should be taken to task. For example, the nursing home fire in Delhi, it is not just the nursing home which should actually be prosecuted upon, it is also the body which did not check that did it have the license or not. Therefore, all stakeholders should be taken on to task. It is not just the nursing home's responsibility, it is also the fire department of that sector which did not check that there was a nursing home or were the legal fire tenders and even the regulations followed or not. It cannot be always a responsibility of the private sector, specifically the clinic, to say that yes, we are regulating everything but nobody is checking. So, if we can make sure that every elevator in a certain sector, in a certain district is, there are a lot of stringent regulations for that. For elevators, there are actually quite a lot. Why can't we have it for fire? Why can't we have it for evacuation? So, therefore, all stakeholders should be jointly responsible. It cannot be just the private sector. Then, we have to stop pursuing this idea of world-class tags, because if we are going for world-class tags, it should be not based on just the idea of large corporate hospitals doing that. The problem is, if you are going for world-class tag itself, the prices will increase and the affordability will go down. And this is where we are going to single doctor clinics, because affordability of a corporate hospital is actually very, very difficult. So, therefore, if we are going for world class facilities, try it within the government sector so that it is affordable. If we are trying for medical tourism and if you are creating hospitals where 50 to 60% of the population can't go, then that is a wrong approach itself. So, we have to have affordability as the most important concept. Last, all stakeholders need to have representation in an association and they need to be taken into consideration with regards to regulation. This means that if there are single doctor clinics all across India, there needs to be an association of these doctors so that they can be represented in regulations, so that thereafter if there is a certain regulation which they cannot comply with, the government already knows. The gist of all of this is that from a top down approach, we have to change our approach from to bottom up, wherein we are looking at the single doctor first and then the corporate, making sure that affordability, accessibility is not hampered, and they go to this sector because it is cheap. They are going here because it is cheap, they are not going here because it is more expensive. So, either we have to democratize this whole concept itself, or we know that it is a mixed care sector, make the government hospitals better so that this 70% goes here rather than here. So, basically it is a very interesting article giving you the structure, the problem and thereafter the solution. You can use this in the examination and I will show you how a question can be asked in the exam. You see, in light of recent developments, the healthcare regulations and its implementation need to be more nuanced and realistic. Do you agree? This is a very good question because it is asking you for the problem in light of recent developments. It is also asking you how to answer it vis-a-vis, should it be nuanced, should it be more realistic, and these options and these concepts will help you answer this question better. Quality, joint responsibility, world-class tag and all stakeholders. With this, let's move to the next article, which is cancer and data problem. Now, this is again a very interesting way of understanding oncology and cancer, and it talks about a challenge which the oncological sectors or the cancer sector or the cancer diagnosis and treatment faces. Now, Initially, there was a lot of questions that why does cancer happen? Now, I am going into the explanation of what is written in the article. And people used to talk about environmental factors, certain foods we are eating, exposure to lead, asbestos. But over a period of time, it became very clear that environmental factors, a patient's environment cannot be the only contributing factor. And it turned out that there are certain DNA mutations which happen or are happening, which in turn lead to susceptibility and more chance of getting cancer. Now, it is very well explained that how does this work actually. The author says that let us take an example of a recipe. For example, I took a recipe for a certain breakfast item, and the recipe said that you have to add milk, sugar, flour, egg, this and that. Now, he said that that recipe for A is complete in itself if all the recipe items are added in the right proportion. Therefore, you will get a proper breakfast. Now, what happens is by mistake, where it said sugar, you read salt and you add salt. Now, the breakfast, though it looks the same, the composition, the texture is different. This is a very interesting way of explaining cancer mutations. So, though A and A delta look the same, the difference is this has sugar, this has salt. By face value, you can't make out, but in texture, it is different. In the same way, what the article is pointing out is this recipe list is the DNA. If the DNA is sequenced in the right way, naturally, you will get the right healthy body. However, it could be that in DNA sequencing over a period of time, a certain element changes, which is called a DNA mutation. And though you look the same, but you will have an anomaly in your DNA, which in turn would mean that you will over a period of time develop a certain vulnerability to cancer because of this mutation. On face value, we look the same, but we may have genetic markers which may be a contributing factor to oncology or to cancer. Now, in that context, doctors then went for what we call as genomic sequencing, which is we started to document the DNA makeup, the RNA makeup of all these patients, and we were able to identify 3,000 such DNA mutations which basically contribute to cancer. But the problem is that there are further close to 10 to 15,000 such in certain DNA combinations which can lead to it. So, the first issue which doctors face today is, though they have genomic sequencing as an option of checking is there vulnerability for with regards to a certain disease, the problem is that we don't have the capacity to sequence the data itself. That is why it says data problem. The amount of data which is produced, it is a data analysis job. It is a data analysis job wherein if you do not have the right sequencing and capacity to analyze this data, you will never be able to figure out what are the mutations. So, there is a lot to be done. One of the recent developments is called next generation sequencing. This is a solution to the issue of data analysis, but creates another issue. Next gen sequencing is a new way of doing biopsy. See, if you have, for example, certain melanoma or any form of cancer, there used to be a need to check for through biopsy, which is physical surgery to go to the place where the tissue has been infected by cancer. You take a biopsy, a cell, and then you used to check it for is it benign or is it malignant. Now, This had a lot of stigma. If today I tell you that a part of your lung will be taken away to check if you have a certain issue with regards to cancer or not, it will be quite dangerous and not everybody will go through with it. So, next gen sequencing came, in which what we call today as liquid biopsy is there. Why am I giving you this data or this idea? Because liquid biopsy has changed the way we look at cancer, wherein multiple different samples are taken and together they are able to piece together what is the nature of the cancer. Do you have cancer or not? For example, urine samples, blood samples, bone marrow liquid, all of this is taken together to create a certain, we are looking for genetic markers. All of these cancer cells have certain protein markers. We are looking for that protein, either alpha, beta protein in that regard. Now, liquid biopsy has made oncology or oncological diagnosis better. However, this again creates an issue, which is data analysis. So, it's because you are taking 3 to 4 samples and now you need all the data together to decide, wherein it says that it is basically like a detective. A detective, if he goes to a crime scene, he gets a lot of different aspects. For example, he will find fingerprints, he will find, for example, a certain gun shell, or he will find blood. But all of it has to be collated together to create the crime scene itself. Same way, in liquid biopsy, 3 to 4 markers have to be taken together. So, therefore, oncological research, oncological diagnosis can only be done if data analysis is good enough. Now, this is the problem statement here. Will the understanding of cancer become a data problem? If you can understand the data well, this is an example of liquid biopsy. If you can take the data well and sequence it properly, and you can come to this conclusion that you have a vulnerability and also you can diagnose it better. Now, herein comes the idea of AI and machine learning. Artificial intelligence and machine learning may be the answer to this data problem, but still the sample size needs to be big enough and more people need to go through with this. Therein comes the aspect of vulnerability, which is based on affordability. I cannot get a genetic test done if I don't have the amount of money to get my genomic sequencing done. So, herein the government or the governments have to make sure that the price of genomic sequencing goes down. It used to be $10,000, it is now $1,000, but still needs to go down, and therefore genomic sequencing of the population, which has been happening under a certain program itself, is a very important step. Now, what type of question can come in the examination? I'll make a question for you here itself. Very simply, the artificial intelligence and machine learning sector needs to be integrated with healthcare. Do you agree? You can make n number of questions on this. You can have, for example, the answer to the India's cancer problem is based on artificial intelligence and machine learning. What are the challenges which are faced by the oncological sector of India? Multiple questions can be asked, but this is where you're asking a commercial space. AI and machine learning mostly is not associated with healthcare, though we are using it in healthcare. There needs to be further integration. So, you can again answer this question. It will help you understand this topic better and produce a better answer in the larger context. So, with this, let's move to the next topic, which is H5N2. Now, this is a pandemic in making, and now finally there is the first death of a human because of this virus. See, in the news, H5N1 and its variant H5N2, commonly called as bird flu or avian, what we call as avian influenza. One second. Avian influenza, or we call influenza A. this is emerging as a very big issue. H5N1 was mostly confined to poultry or to the poultry sector, to birds. However, very recently in America, there has been transmigration, and there is both reverse transmigration and migration of this virus between species. The Indian Express has recently argued, and very well represented in the newspaper itself, that through poultry it is going into birds, but from birds it is spreading across in different species, be it mammals, be it marine animals. And as of today, H5N1 has been detected not just in poultry, but in marine animals, in seals, in even cattle now. And cattle based dairy sector has now seen a certain impact of H5N1, because 60 to 70% of the milk which is there on the shelves in America today have that virus in some form or the other, either in a dormant form or in a what we call as killed form. But the point is, H5N1 is now transmigrating from different animals to and it is basically spreading like wildfire amongst the animals itself, and H5N1 transmission to humans is also there. There have been 5 such cases in America. However, they were mild cases. Now, the more disastrous consequence of all of this is H5N2, a variation of H5N1, has now recently impacted humans, and in Mexico it has in turn led to a death. The virus is mutating, the virus is quickly changing and is adapting. Starting from avian influenza, from birds it went to mammals, to animals, to marine animals, to now dairy to humans. And human transmission with regards to bird flu is also very, very common. Straightforward transmission is also there, either through holding the poultry and then touching the mouth or the nose, or through droplets which are given by these what we call as poultry animals, and then you breathe in this dust and droplets in that regard. So there can be 2 ways, not something new, but this way of transmission used to be very rare. It is becoming common. People have got infected, have recovered, but H5N1 didn't kill you, but H5N2 is now killing you, and therefore now it creates a context in which we need to be very, 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 very careful. We can't let this become the next COVID-19, wherein see, H5N1 N2 was only in birds. From birds it went into dairy, which is cattle, into sea animals, into mammals, and what is interesting is that there is cross migration also, reverse cross migration. They are impacting themselves also. From a cattle it is spreading to the bird itself, and in between all of this you have the humans. We can get it from any of these sources. We can be infecting the birds also, but the problem is that previously H5N1 did not kill anyone. Now it is becoming lethal and fatal. So precaution needs to be taken, mitigation needs to be taken. Further, genomic sequencing of this virus is very, very important. We need to take this seriously. It is entering our food chain itself. It is entering our food grocery section itself, and therefore governments need to take this seriously, and it is now already an epidemic. It was previously also called an epidemic in 1997 in different parts of the world. Bangladesh, China, Egypt, India, Indonesia and Vietnam proclaimed it as an epidemic within the birds itself, but now it is spreading to others and to humans, and therefore you can expect a question like this. The recent spread of avian influenza is the next pandemic in making? It's a very interesting question for GS paper 3. that because it is now spreading to humans and human to human will become possible, and already animal to human is there, COVID-19 showed us something like this can become like a super virus and impact everybody and bring everything to a halt. So in this type of a question, you agree with it, you tell them the quantum of it, you tell them the problems, but in the end also say that there can be intervention. Genomic sequencing of the virus, a virological study of the virus, further if needed a vaccine at least for the animals itself, if not humans, and there is a need to control the spread. We need to better understand H5N1, which we do not have as of right now. That is why it is important to understand it. Okay. With this, let us look at this image, and this is the glorious image of the Atlas V rocket along with the Boeing CST-100 Starliner on it. Now, this is a very landmark development because Barry Wilmore and Sunita Williams, two very veteran American astronauts, are on board this capsule itself, Starliner, and this may be a major breakthrough for America vis-a-vis travel to the International Space Station. Now, what is the Starliner program? The Starliner program is basically a modified Atlas V rocket which has already been there. The Atlas series is used by America for a very long time. The NASA stopped producing shuttles and capsules and has for a very long time relied on the Soyuz rocket, the Russian rocket, and its capsule to take the astronauts to and fro from the ISS, International Space Station. And very recently they have a new actor which is Dragon X, SpaceX, which is the SpaceX technology is now being used, and Dragon X has been used to take the astronauts to and from the ISS. Now, this is a project in making for the past 14 years. This is called the Starliner project, under which Boeing and NASA have jointly developed a certain capsule. It has two basic components: the crew module, which is this one. Let me change the color of the pen. You have the crew module, which is this, and you have the service module. Now, service module is basically to take them into orbit, and most of its activity will happen in the LEO, which is low Earth orbit. I will tell you what it means, but this will take them to the International Space Station. This is going to come back into the Earth's orbit, and it has a heat shield under it so that it can re-enter into the Earth's atmosphere, and this has the capacity to take 7 astronauts at one point of time. Now, the question, or there is a lot of attention towards the Starliner because of one reason. Boeing for the past 5 to 10 years now does not have a very good record with regards to safety, with regards to the 747 MAX 8 and even the recent doors coming off from its aircrafts. The question was, can Boeing pull off something like this where there is the lives of astronauts at stake? Further, re-entering the Earth's atmosphere would need a lot of good engineering and a very good heat shield, and the quality standards of Boeing have been questioned for a very long time now, and with a lot of consequences. MAX 8 was a very big disaster, and over and above that, recently, just because of one bolt, 2 to 3 planes have lost their emergency doors, which is something you don't associate with the airline sector. Boeing as a company is also under a lot of scrutinization, has gone through a lot of changes, and as of right now, not everything is in the place as it should be. So the question was that, can Boeing pull off Starliner? And this launch is that way very important, because this launch proves the credibility of Boeing. Now let us see, they have to stay in orbit for today and come back by the next 2 to 3 days, and their re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere is going to be quite important, and that will prove the credibility of Boeing. The Starliner project has a lot of implications for the NASA, because America will then become the first country in the world to have 2 modules to take their astronauts. Previously, they only had the Soyuz, which is the Russian. Now, they will have 2 options, either Dragon X or Starliner, and therefore, there will be commissioning and a proper tender which will be passed, under which there will be division, and the ISS to and fro movement is going to be then dedicated to either Boeing plus Dragon X both together. So, it has a lot of implications, America becoming the first country, if this is approved after this is a trial run in that regard. Now, I've used a word LEO, low Earth orbit. This gives me an opportunity and would be that way is quite fruitful to understand what are the basic orbits. I'm not going to give you a comprehensive understanding of this, but a good revision of this would be actually good. Now, when we talk about orbits, there are three basic orbits which are talked about. The first one is called low Earth orbit, LEO, LEO or low Earth orbit. Now, there are different definitions of low Earth orbit, but generally what is accepted is if 160 kilometers above to 1000 kilometers below the Earth's surface, you are basically considered in low Earth orbit, 1000 kilometers and less. And basically the International Space Station today is in the 400 to 450 kilometer mark, which is it is above the Earth's surface 400 to 450 kilometers. Now basically the problem with low Earth orbit is that you are very close to the Earth's gravitational pull. Therefore, firstly you are very quick, you are revolving around the Earth at a very high speed. That is not good for the equipment, and the satellite, if put into a LEO, will mostly get degraded or will lose its efficiency and even its efficacy very quickly, because it's at a very heavy load of Earth's gravitational pull, and it takes a lot of effort to be in LEO also, because you have to always negate the gravitational pull of the Earth. So mostly experimental satellites, the ISS, is kept into this orbit, and ISS, that is why, needs a lot of repair from time to time because of its very quick speed around the Earth's surface itself. And over and above that, the wear and tear is very high. More than that, you will never want to have a communication satellite or a remote sensing satellite at this speed across the Earth. They mostly tend to match the Earth's what we call as rotational speed. So they mostly take 24 hours to go around the Earth. It could be quicker, it could be less. So that is LEO. Then you would have heard GTO, what is called geostationary orbit, and geosynchronous orbit. Synchronous orbit. See, GTO is called geotransfer orbit, in the sense that if I have to put a satellite into geostationary or into sun synchronous or geosynchronous, it is also called sun synchronous, then I put it into GTO. Basically it goes into LEO, then slowly does orbital, what we call as maneuvers to go up and up and up, and then leave the Earth's base gravitational pull and go towards the other orbit. Now what is the difference between GSO and sun synchronous, which is geostationary orbit and sun synchronous? See, in sun synchronous what happens is that if this is the axis of the Earth, you put the satellite in a north to south configuration. You put it into a north to south configuration, basically goes from pole to pole. Now why would I put an certain satellite into a sun synchronous? Because if you want remote sensing, which is if you want a certain satellite which can check a certain area at a given point of time at a certain image is needed, you will put it into sun synchronous. Basically it will always be at a certain point at a certain time. You can predict it. Basically, if I need to take the image of the Indian subcontinent to check the agricultural spread, what will I do? I will put it into the geosynchronous orbit, and at 4 p.m. every day it will be going over India, and therefore it will be taking a very clear image of the Indian subcontinent and then go beyond it. So I know that it will be, for example, in Moscow at one time, in China at one point of time, in India, and then it will be, for example, at Antarctica at one point of time. I know according to time where it is. That is called geosynchronous, which is going north to south. What is then the concept of geostationary? Geostationary is the most stable in that regard, 36,000 kilometers away from the Earth's surface itself, and the idea is that you put it according to the rotation of the Earth. So you put it from east to west or west to east according to your need. But why is it called geostationary? See, what is done is that the rotation of the Earth and the movement of the satellite is basically done fully in sync, so that if Earth goes 1 degree, the satellite also goes 1 degree. So what happens is, it looks like that the satellite is actually stationary. So for communication satellites, we go for what we call as geostationary orbit. So basically, if the Earth is rotating, the satellite keeps on rotating with the Earth, and it is always looking at the same point at the same point of time. So at every given point of time, it is looking at the same point. That is why it's called geostationary. For example, if we need INSAT, if we need communication satellite, we keep it above Earth, and it will keep on moving with the Earth, and basically it will remain above India itself. So for example, our Navik system has 3 in geostationary, 2 in sun synchronous, so that we have communication at say certain points of time also, and we have geostationary in this regard to look towards the Earth also. So this is what is called as LEO. So LEO is mostly used for experimental flights, and the ISS actually operates from here. So this topic is quite simple, straightforward, but I've tried to explain to you the orbits LEO, GTO, which is from sun synchronous if you want to put them into geostationary, or from LEO to put into geostationary. Geostationary is movement with the Earth, and it is basically looking like it is stationary. Sun synchronous means moving north to south, so that you get a certain image at a certain given point of time. With this, let's look at a question out of this area, a very interesting one that is. The Starliner CST-100 has been jointly developed by Boeing, Lockheed Martin and NASA. It is a reusable rocket based on Atlas V. Its primary service usability will be in the geostationary and geosynchronous orbit missions. Which of them are correct? I am giving you again some time to read the question. I would expect you to write the answer. For the students who will be watching the recording later, please do write the answer in the chat box. That will be a good practice for you. There are 2 questions like this, and if you can read closely, you will find multiple mistakes in 2 of these statements. Firstly, it is not Lockheed Martin, it is only Boeing and NASA. Is it based on the concept of Atlas V, and is it reusable? Yes. And is it primary service usability in geostationary? No, it is in LEO. That is why I had this discussion, so that you have an understanding of what you mean by geostationary and geosynchronous. So here the answer becomes only one of the statements is correct, none of them are correct, either 1 or 3. So only second one is correct, 1 and 3 incorrect. With this, let's move to a topic which is again brewing up, is developing, which is the concept of the EFTA. And Norway's ambassador was talking about the EFTA. So what is the EFTA? India along with 4 nations, remember their name, Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway and Switzerland, have recently gone into a free trade agreement. Under that free trade agreement, the EFTA countries, these 4 countries, have promised to put in $100 billion an investment into India, produce 10 lakh jobs in the next 15-year period in the pharma, chemical, mineral sector, and the Indian government has promised that we will also make sure that on your investment you get a specific and a predefined, which is being defined as of right now, a predefined return. If either party will not do it, then the FTA will collapse. Basically, if India is not able to provide return, and if these countries don't put in this money, then the agreement will basically automatically dissolve itself. Now, why is this important? Because this way India is now creating inroads into the EU, but not as a EU unit, but basically with these specific countries. That's why EFTA, European FTA. Now, the article which has been written, the Norwegian minister has pointed out that Norway is really interested in 2 to 3 sectors, and out of them there is a word which was used by her which is quite interesting. The Norwegian minister argued that they want to be involved in renewable energy, in the maritime sector, but also one more thing. She said that they want to be part of this circular economy of India so that they can contribute, you can say constructively or at least beneficially for them and for us in the circular economy concept. Now, as it is, you already know this basic fact. This is very, very important for prelims. But other than that, what is circular economy? Because that becomes very, very interesting and important. Now, what circular economy is basically is an economy which uses less raw material, produces less waste and fewer emissions. The word circularity comes in the fact that when a raw material is put into place, it is put into a sustainable design which allows for better recycling. It is put into production, goes into distribution, consumed by the people, either repaired or reused. Then if discarded is collected, and out of the collected waste you can recycle most of the components. There will be a certain residue which will be left, but other than that, most of the waste should now become raw material. This is the concept of circular economy. Circular economy basically creates a certain circularity in the economy where raw material production and waste management go together. Raw material is being produced into a finished good. The finished good itself becomes a waste. That waste is raw material again for that finished good. This is where Norway is saying that it will be contributing to India and would be very, very interesting and important, because if they can help us in creating better waste management technologies and can give us their better waste management technologies, we will be able to do better with our raw material, and this may be a very important cogwheel in the larger story of what we call as sustainable development and India's greener future. So this is the point which actually stood out of the whole article itself, and I am discussing this with you so that you can understand it in the larger context of what you should know. So this is a brewing up or something which is now going to become more and more significant later. This is the development. You don't need to worry about the nitty-gritties as of right now. When there is a tangible development that will be important for you for the examination, you should worry about a question like this in the prelims exam. Consider the following statements. Everybody who is watching this video later has to write the answer in the chat box. Consider the following statements: Switzerland, Poland, Norway, Germany. Which of the above are part of the EFTA with India? Is it only one, only two, only three, or none? So here again seems easy because you've just done it with me. In the exam context becomes difficult. Here Poland and Germany has to do nothing with this. Norway and Switzerland is there. So only two, answer becomes B. So again a realistic question in the examination can come both this year or next year. Okay. With this we reach the last discussion we need to have, which is the exact turnout percentage of this election. Now it was believed that the election percentages are higher than last time, but as it turns out, from 67.4% in 2019, we are at 65.79%. So we have not crossed last year's tally. We are still at 65.79%. And the most interesting part of this article is this one, which actually says that under what section does the Lok Sabha get constituted. It says that the Election Commission of India, in terms of Section 73 of the Representation of People's Act 1951, remember 1951, it has now sent the list of elected MPs to the President, and now the 18th Lok Sabha process of formation will be put into place once the members elected to the houses list is sent by the Election Commission to the President. That has been done yesterday, and therefore Section 73 now becomes very, very important for RPI Act 1951, because this tells us how it happens. You don't need to get caught up into the data that Bihar was 56%, Uttar Pradesh 56%, Mizoram 56%. These are low turnout areas, but you don't have to worry about that. You just have to remember overall percentage so that this number is relevant for the next 5 years, and need to know this section also. Now, with this, I would like to end this discussion. A very important announcement for all of you. Remember that the price 24,999 only till 9th of June. Further, on 9th June itself, we also have the prelims mock test UAI PMT, which has been happening for the past 4 weeks. We'll be there with the discussion on 10th also. But the idea is very, very simple. You have to basically get your technique better. So the dress rehearsal for the examination, if you're an aspiring candidate, still give it. If you are giving it for 2024, you have to give it so that you practice everything. For an aspiring candidate for 2025, this may be relevant because this gives you a simulation of what happens in the examination and also tells you the importance of CSAT and GS both together. This gives you a feel. A lot of people give the examination to get a feel. Why not give this to actually get a feel of what it means to give the UPSC exam? So with this, I would like to end the session. Thank you so much. I will see you soon. Thank you. Take care and bye-bye.